Driver, You're the Wheelman. It was released in 1999 for the PlayStation, PC, and even a Game Boy port, and was one of the first open-world city driving games to hit the market. It was competing up against Grand Theft Auto, but there wasn't too much tension at first because the main difference is Grand Theft Auto was almost an open city adventure game in addition to being just a driving game, while Driver was mainly focused on, well, driving. In the first game, you couldn't get out of your car. But later down the road, they started adapting more features, and unfortunately, that's when it started to kind of encroach on Grand Theft Auto territory in a sense, by adding like shooting features, the ability to steal cars, and in one game, the only way to save your car is to put it in the garage first. You see where this is going. So let's go ahead and take a look at these games and see how it started and how basically it ended. Today, these graphics are laughable. But back then, this made you feel like you were driving on a beautiful sunny day. Free Drive is very simple. We have 4 cities to choose from: Miami, San Francisco, and the unlockable levels of Los Angeles and New York. So what can you do in Free Drive? You drive, you increase your felony, and you keep your damage low. There's various ways to increase your felony: speeding, running red lights, driving the wrong way, running over pedestrians, ramming cars, especially cop cars, and at night, having busted headlights, believe it or not, which is actually pretty cool for the 90s. This game was one of my favorites, with my only complaint being the absence of a car selection. You get different cars in each city, but it's only one per city and you get what you get. The Wheelman had a Game Boy counterpart, and typically downgrades tend to suck, but honestly, this port is surprisingly well. Honestly, this version plays about as well as the PlayStation version. No joke, this was an excellent handheld game. In this version, you do have a car selection, and can even choose the cop car, though it won't grant you immunity from the law. While San Francisco may be missing, the other 3 levels are mapped almost the exact same as the PlayStation. The only drawback is that collision is the only way to trigger the cops. Speeding and wrong way driving need not apply in this version. It may not look like much, but when you're a kid who has to go on long drives, this is a lifesaver. I grew up in Corpus Christi. It's about 3 hours north of the Mexican border, but I had family in Oklahoma City. These were 10-hour drives, and Tetris is only going to keep me occupied for so long. Driver 2. This is the first game that features international cities. We have Chicago, Havana, Las Vegas, and Rio de Janeiro. A lot of changes were made since the first game. We have roads that kind of bend in a curve-like shape, breaking away from the fixed grid system that you saw in the first game. They also introduced a car selection screen, and perhaps the biggest thing that makes Driver 2 different from the first game is that you can actually exit your vehicle and steal other cars. With changes like these, you would think the game would be well received, but they kinda added a little bit too much for its own good. With hardware limitations at the time, they actually had to split the game in 2. While the night does look better since they actually have lights in the building, the graphics are kinda worse despite that, even by PlayStation standards. These lines are a little too squiggly. Only 2 cops can chase you at a time, unlike the first game where I think up to 4 would be on your trail. The game is sluggish, littered with glitches, and a very weird example of that is here in Havana at the starting point. If you exit your vehicle and go to the first intersection, I don't know how to explain it. You have to kind of push a bunch of like random buttons. It triggers a thunderstorm for a few seconds, and then everything goes back to normal. The real reason why I think the game turned out this bad was a common problem you see in a lot of failed games: rush production. It seems like they were constantly trying to get this thing rushed out to compete with Rockstar and Grand Theft Auto, but again, as we've seen with other games we've played, this is a consequence of a rushed product. This could have looked a lot better if they would have just waited a bit closer to the PlayStation 2's launch date and then launch a game with this kind of programming in it. It's just not going to run on the PlayStation, and making cutbacks is just going to make the gameplay itself worse than the first game, and that's exactly what happened here. When Driver 2 came out, some argued that it was a Grand Theft Auto clone, and I kind of disagree based on the smoothness of gameplay, but also it just didn't really feel much like a Grand Theft Auto game, and a lot of that is because of the limited stuff you can do in free drive mode. But then comes Driver 3, and while it is a huge improvement from the second game, it still has a heap ton of problems. Again, It's a very glitchy game. I'm not really a fan of the graphics. The graphics always came across as very weird and squarish. And this is going to make me sound picky, but I really hate the lighting in Miami. Miami's supposed to be like this beautiful, sunny city like you saw in the first game, but in this one, it has like that weird 3 o'clock sun where school's just letting out and you may be just getting off work if you work like a 9 to 3 job. You kind of know what I'm talking about, that weird 3 p.m. sun. I hate that sun in real life, and to see it in a video game that's supposed to get me away from real life is just disappointing. They added the ability to shoot things this time when you do get out of your car, so there's a little bit more to do. Consequently, that's also what pushed a lot of gamers into comparing it even more to Grand Theft Auto. And it went from being a driving game to, I hate to say it, but basically in many ways a clone of Grand Theft Auto. But if you think this is similar to Grand Theft Auto, wait until the 4th game comes out. But first, Driver 3 also had a Game Boy counterpart, this time on the Game Boy Advance. But unfortunately, it doesn't hold up very well. There is no free drive mode for one thing, let alone a car selection. And literally everyone and everything is unresponsive. The police don't do anything, you can shoot whoever you want. I mean, there's just nothing to really do in this game other than undercover mode. Driver, parallel lines. This would basically be the nail in the coffin, so to speak. And you time travel between the 1970s and 2004. The only real cool thing about that is getting to see the Trade Center before and after. But one thing is pretty evident here. I mean, just look at this. Now, this is when we can safely say it's a Grand Theft Auto clone. And it's even worse than the 3rd game. While the graphics are a huge improvement, you can't swim. And there's only one city. I know there's 2 time periods for that, but when 90% of the streets are the same, where's the fun in that? In addition, there's not really an exact car selection screen. Instead, you have to find a garage, you drive a car in there, and then you can pick between the different cars that you've stolen and returned to the garage. You know, kind of like that game, Grand Theft Auto. Basically, this would be the final nail in the coffin. Now, I don't have the 5th game, but there would be a 5th game called Driver San Francisco, which was decently received on all but the Wii. The Wii, they had basically a completely different game. They managed to squeeze a couple of mobile games out here and there, but basically what you see is it. So as you can see, back to what I was saying in the beginning, it started off as a very basic driving game, and I think that's why so many people liked it. It wasn't a complicated concept. You just simply popped in the disc and played. But as it started to kind of get more desperate to pull in some of those Grand Theft Auto fans, it started to, in my opinion, sell out a little bit and start expanding a lot of the features in this game. And by that time, fans were looking at it, and especially with the condition it was in, often being glitchy and broken by the time they started offering these kind of features, and they're like, you know, why would I play this glitchy piece of crap when I can just play Grand Theft Auto, a game that not only does all these features, but was original to it and runs a lot smoother. And despite its flaws, I still love the sequels. But the sequels aren't going to compare to the first game, and they're definitely not going to compare to Grand Theft Auto.